In this presentation, you will learn about technological advancements in communication. Human beings have always been developing new technologies for communication, going back to the printing press and even the act of writing itself. But the past 120 years have seen rapid technical advancement in communication, from the first telephones through modern internet. Notable technological advancements in communication since the late 1800s include the telephone, the answering machine, the fax machine, internet, and cellular telephones. Mass communication also brought revolutionary changes, including movies, broadcast radio and television, and tremendous advantages in printing and photography. While the invention of the wired telegraph enabled people to rapidly communicate over long distances, the telephone was the first instantaneous communications device to find its way into a large number of homes and businesses. Alexander Graham Bell patented the invention in the 1870s, and within a few decades, millions of the devices were in use. Phones enabled people to connect with neighbors, friends, and family around the country and the world. The technology gradually improved to enable calls without operator assistance and eventually to allow direct dial long distance and international calls. Answering machines were developed to record messages from callers when recipients were away or busy. Public payphones popped up to let people make calls on the go. Fax machines became common in offices in the 1980s. These allowed use of telephone lines for sending document copies relatively quickly without having to mail them. Computers and the Internet. As computing technology rapidly evolved after World War II, scientists and engineers grasped the importance of connecting computers across long distances to share information. By the late 60s, researchers had begun to create the beginnings of today's Internet through a government-backed network called ARPANET, named for the Defense Department's Advanced Research Projects Agency. The network connected universities, government agencies, and communications companies. By 1972, the first ARPANET email was sent. Networking protocols were developed in this period. By the late 70s and 80s, as home computers became common, local bulletin board systems popped up, allowing computer users to connect to an often free and hobbyist-run system where they could exchange messages, play games, and share information with other users. National commercial online services such as CompuServe, Prodigy, and America Online also popped up during the 80s and grew during the 90s. The services were slow, expensive, and primitive looking, but allowed users to communicate, read news, and get weather information from their home computers. By mid-90s, many of these services and new dial-in internet service providers allowed users to connect to the rapidly growing internet. Users could access websites, send emails, and instant messages. In the late 90s, telephone and cable companies began offering faster internet connections. Cellular phones. Early portable phones began to appear in the 70s, and car phones began to be popular by the 80s. But the devices were still large, clunky, and expensive. By late 1980s, portable handheld cellular phones became available, and by the late 90s, the devices were mainstream. Pagers, which allowed users to receive notifications and simple messages, were popular. Pagers gave way to pocket-sized cell phones, which let users make calls and receive calls. Early plans offered limited calling time and roaming ability outside a home network, but those features rapidly developed and cell phones began to displace landline phones. Text messaging also boomed in popularity in the early 2000s, and some cell phones allowed limited access to the internet and email. Smartphones and social media. In 2007, Apple CEO Steve Jobs famously debuted the iPhone, the first modern smartphone. The device enabled full access to the World Wide Web and email, as well as calling and texting. The iPhone and Android soon had support for third-party apps that would let users order food or check bank balances. At the same time, social media companies like Facebook and Twitter took off, allowing users to share information online without requiring the IT skills needed to build a traditional website. New kinds of phone media like social media, Instagram, and Snapchat appeared, as did phone-focused message tools like WhatsApp and Telegram. Many of these tools took advantage of increasingly powerful cameras built into modern smartphones. As smartphone popularity grew, they became natural hubs for social networking, and thus technological advancements in communication grew. Thank you for watching the presentation.